For Israel, 1948 was an eventful year to say the least. A year earlier, a historic vote in the UN recommended a partition of the British Mandate of Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states. And in the wake of the Holocaust, the international community voted overwhelmingly in favor of the Jewish right to self-determination. By 1948, Israel's early leaders were ready to create a Jewish state alongside their Arab neighbors. But not everyone in the international community was so supportive. Surrounding Arab nations openly threatened to wipe out Israel in its infancy. The war that ensued was complex to say the least. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War, or fair warning, this war has like 6 different names, so bear with me. It was also known as the 1948 War of Independence, or Milchemet Komamut, the War of Sovereignty in English as Ben-Gurion called it, or the War of Liberation by the Israeli Army, and the Nakba, or catastrophe by many Arabs. These names reflect the different realities of the war and its consequences on different people. To some, 1948 was a year of miracles, as key world powers like the Soviets and Americans supported the establishment of a Jewish state, while to others, 1948 was an unequivocal catastrophe as the war brought with it loss of life and land. So, what exactly happened in the war, and why does it matter today? Let's get into it. The first phase of the war began in 1947 after the UN passed the resolution to partition the land. Jews living in the British Mandate were overjoyed, but there was little time to celebrate. Almost immediately, the Arab Higher Committee, then the political arm of local Arabs living in the Mandate, started clashes with the Jews. Soon enough, it was practically a civil war. Violent Arab riots broke out, and although the British were legally in control of the region, they'd already decided to withdraw and for the most part adopted a pretty hands-off approach to the growing conflict. However, they did maintain strict quotas on Jewish immigration from Europe, as well as on supplies, making manpower and arms shortages pressing issues. Meanwhile, the Hagana, a Jewish pre-state paramilitary force, was bracing for the possibility of an all-out war. The Arabs had rejected the partition plan and didn't believe outside nations should determine their fate. In response, Arab terrorism in the Mandate was on the rise. And there was another fear. The Arab population in the region was twice that of the Jews, and the Arab media played up its military prowess. This propaganda machine spoke of total war against the Jews there and stoked more fear in the Jewish people. After several failed attempts to quell Arab aggression, which included a devastating siege of Jerusalem, Ben-Gurion and his inner circle enacted something called Tochnit, or Plan Dalet, Dalet being the 4th letter in the Hebrew alphabet, so basically Plan D. Plan Dalet remains controversial to this day, and some researchers suggest Plan Dalet was an intentional population transfer of the Arabs living there. Others, though, disagree. For example, historian Anita Shapira points out that while it did order commanders to destroy villages and expel the inhabitants if they resisted, it also instructed commanders to leave them where they were if they did not resist while ensuring Jewish control of the village. Ultimately, the Hagana seized control of certain major cities, including Haifa, Jaffa, Safed, and Tiberias, as well as many Arab villages. In total, some 300,000 local Arabs fled or were expelled before the official start of the war. Many wealthier Arabs left voluntarily, and many thought their evacuation was only temporary, with plans to return once the Jews were defeated. On May 14, 1948, the moment everyone had been bracing for finally arrived. Just before the British Mandate was set to expire, David Ben-Gurion, Israel's first prime minister, declared Israeli statehood. Mind you, this wasn't an easy decision to come by. In fact, Ben-Gurion and a small circle of 9 other leaders made the call with a vote. The motion passed by the slimmest of margins, only 6-4. But Israel was born. Again, there was little time to celebrate, and no one knew that better than Ben-Gurion. On that historic day, he wrote in his diary that he was a mourner among the celebrants. Ben-Gurion correctly anticipated the high cost of declaring Israeli statehood. On May 15th, the very next day as the British Mandate was officially terminated, 5 surrounding Arab armies, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, and Jordan, invaded the day-old nation. Now, a few things helped Israel withstand the initial wave of the attacks. For starters, just a few days before, intelligence gathered by the French consulate in Jerusalem informed the Hagana about specifics of the Arab army's plans. Also, with the British out of the picture, Jewish immigration picked up, which meant more fighters. But these were hardly soldiers. They were ill-equipped European refugees, mostly Holocaust survivors with little to no military training. Most of them didn't even speak the same language. Imagine trying to coordinate an army when you can't even talk to each other. But the Israelis were also able to ship in more arms and ammunition. This helped the Hagana turn itself into a real army and even incorporate the Irgun and the Lehi, 2 rival Jewish militias. United under one banner, they formed the modern-day Israel Defense Forces, or the IDF. Still, Israel's first month in existence was marked by tragedy. Jewish immigrants who had been freed from concentration camps only a few years earlier went straight to the battlefield, and thousands died in the fighting. Ultimately, it would be the bloodiest of Israel's wars. Egypt invaded from the south and eventually reached the southern Israeli cities of Ashdod and Beersheba and headed further north from there. Syria penetrated northern Israel, while Jordan, the strongest of the invading Arab armies and trained by the British, captured Jerusalem. The Israelis were very much outgunned, especially at the start of the war. On May 19th, the Egyptians attacked Yad Mordechai, a kibbutz in southern Israel. There, a force of about 100 Israeli kibbutzniks and 2 paramilitary squads armed with only rifles, 1 machine gun, and 1 anti-tank weapon somehow fought off 2,500 Egyptians equipped with armor, artillery, and air units for 5 days. The Egyptians incurred heavy losses, and Israeli losses were comparatively light. Still, in large part, this first month was pretty rough for Israelis. Counterattacks in Jenin, Ashdod, and Latrun failed. The IDF also failed to defend inhabitants of the Jewish quarter in the old city of Jerusalem, which was still under siege. In that first month, 1,600 Jewish lives were lost. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but when Israel was first established, only 650,000 Jews lived there. A key turning point for the Israelis was a UN-brokered truce, which came into effect on June 11th. The truce was meant to be in place for 28 days, and it included an arms embargo. Basically, the idea was neither side was supposed to benefit from the truce. But of course, that's not what happened. Both sides used this time to improve strategic positions and import more weapons. Israel bypassed the embargo and brought in a massive shipment of arms from Czechoslovakia. Without that shipment, Yitzhak Rabin, then an IDF commander, later said it was very doubtful whether we would have been able to conduct the war. Israel increased its arms supply to more than 25,000 rifles, 5,000 machine guns, and 50 million bullets. Plus, with more Jewish immigrants arriving, they were able to almost double their manpower. Coming out of the truce, Israel launched a major offensive called Operation Danny, named after an officer, Danny Mass, who was killed earlier in 1948. The first phase of Operation Danny called for Israeli forces to capture the cities of Lod and Ramla. These 2 Arab cities were strongholds for Arab Legion forces and were both located on the route connecting Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. Arab snipers and militiamen could pick off Jewish transport vehicles, which forced traffic between the 2 cities to a roundabout southern bypass. The operation to take control of these areas was a massive success. The Israelis seized the Lod airport and a strategic railway station in Ramla, as well as dozens of surrounding villages. However, it's important to note that during Operation Danny, some 50,000 Arab residents of Lod and Ramla were expelled from their homes. By the time both towns were in Israeli hands, only a few hundred of the original inhabitants remained. This was the lone case of organized removal of entire cities, according to Anita Shapira. In fact, Ben-Gurion ensured that the Arab residents of Nazareth would not be expelled because they had surrendered. The second phase, however, which was an attempt to recapture Latrun and end the siege on Jerusalem, ultimately failed after several costly attacks. Still, the partial success of Operation Danny boosted morale on the Israeli side, which was gaining ground on the Arab armies. In July, Ben-Gurion proposed attacking Arab armies in Judea and Samaria, or the present-day West Bank. He also supported another attempt to attack Latrun with the aim of capturing East Jerusalem, including the Old City, and liberating all of Jerusalem. But Ben-Gurion, a man used to getting his way, was opposed by his top military advisors, who feared another attack on Latrun would ultimately fail and preferred giving resources and manpower to other fronts, namely the southern Negev region. Ultimately, it was put to a vote, and Ben-Gurion lost, with members of his own party voting against him. Now, diverting resources to the south ultimately proved to be a pretty good idea, where the fight against the Egyptians continued. By the fall of 1948, Israeli forces were preparing a major offensive to drive the Egyptians out of Beersheba, southern Israel's largest city. The Negev Brigade, a branch of the IDF, launched their attack early in the morning, and within a few hours, the Egyptians surrendered at the city's police station. About 120 Egyptian soldiers were taken as prisoners. This was a crucial blow to the Egyptians, as losing Beersheba severed a key supply route. On the other side, capturing Beersheba helped the Israelis take back control of the southern desert. In December, the Israelis successfully launched Operation Horev, a final assault on Egyptian forces in the southwest, which ultimately ended the Egyptian threat on Israel's southern communities. By February of 1949, Egypt officially withdrew. Israel emerged bruised and battered. In all, over 6,000 Israelis died, which was about 1% of Israel's total population, a massive loss. And this number, tragically, included some 2,000 Holocaust survivors. But the country was still standing. Meanwhile, in response to Israel's victory, more than 850,000 Jews living in Iran and Arab countries in the Middle East and North Africa were expelled from their homelands, and many settled in the new Jewish state. The indigenous Arab population was ultimately the worst hit, though. 700,000 fled or exiled, and according to Arab historian Arif al-Arif, more than 15,000 were killed. Despite the huge losses Israel incurred, both from a casualty standpoint and from losing the eastern part of Jerusalem to the Jordanians, the war was still a huge success for the Jews overall. They created a new, modern army, took in swaths of Jewish refugees from Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, and they started a nation in the Jewish ancestral homeland. As is often the case in history, the war had different impacts on different people, though. For Israel, it was a huge success. For many Arabs, it was a massive loss. But only by acknowledging the different perspectives can we begin to unravel the true complexity of what happened in 1948. Thanks for watching. See you guys next week.